The Kawhi Leonard scandal isn't just about the Clippers cheating the system. It's about whether small market teams like the Pelicans ever get a fair shot. Let's get into it in the Monday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Monday, back from vacation. Pre-recorded all the shows last week, but we had some news about the Kawhi Leonard scandal, and I'm going to tell you why this matters for the Pelicans and the league as a whole, but particularly for small market teams, because this does have a big, far-reaching, existential even impact on the New Orleans Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is here and new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets. Download the FanDuel app over at FanDuel.com to get started today. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team, so please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everyday. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget, you can watch Locked On Pelicans on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every single weekday, 10:30 a.m. Same place you watch your Pelicans play. And the season is coming here soon. Media Day is about 2 weeks away, and I am excited for it here. So let's get into the Kawhi Leonard scandal here, because this is, to me, a very, very big deal, right? Let's break down what's happening, why it's such a big deal, particularly on the Pelicans in small markets, and then kind of the fallout from all of this. So let's kind of just explain the scandal. There are reports from Pablo Torre on his podcast, Pablo Torre Finds Out, and over at The Athletic, and then followed up with some other reporting from John Corrales, host of Locked On Celtics, my good friend, who writes over the Boston Sports Journal. And reports basically surfaced that the Clippers allegedly funneled about $28 million to Kawhi Leonard through a shady endorsement deal. A no-show job for, I think it's Aspire, it's like a tree planting nonprofit where Kawhi didn't really have to do anything. They just gave him $28 million and he didn't actually do any sort of sponsorship work, advertisements, anything like that from this group. What makes it, now that on the surface isn't that big of a deal, right? Sometimes you sign people to things, agreements, and then you just don't exercise the rights for it for whatever reason. Maybe they sign this with Kawhi and then realize oh, he's not the right spokesperson for us. There's nothing shady about that right there. Then it starts to get a little bit weirder. So it's a waste of money, don't get me wrong. But then it gets weirder because Aspire was a sponsor of the Los Angeles Clippers. And you might be like, wait a second, they're giving him $28 million. That's a little weird. Here's the thing though. Sponsors with the team often have individual sponsorship deals with the players. When Zatarans was sponsoring the Pelicans, the jersey patch sponsor, the first one, they signed DeMarcus Cousins to an individual deal separate from the team and everything like that. And I'll tell you, we'll circle back around to that in the next segment because, when DeMarcus Cousins left the team, they still sponsored him. They tried to get out of sponsoring him, and because it was just a written contract, they couldn't. Now, from that, I think probably because of that one directly, a lot of these sponsorship deals require you to be a member of the team that they also sponsor. So that, to me, isn't the sketchy thing just yet. It doesn't look great, but whatever. The real issue is that Steve Ballmer, the billionaire, the richest owner in the NBA, invested $50 million into Aspire. And then of that $50 million, right, you could almost say directly $28 million went to Kawhi Leonard. That does then, I think, create a conflict of interest, because why that matters is this is apparently a salary cap violation. This is circumventing the salary cap to give a player more money. This was not when they originally got Kawhi Leonard. This was on a new contract that he signed, which was slightly below market. It wasn't a full max that he got. Is this a way for them to get him to take a lower deal and then just give him some money kind of off the salary cap books to make up for it? It definitely does appear so. The salary cap, the luxury tax, the collective bargaining agreement is vitally important to the integrity of the NBA. All of that exists to keep things fair. Every team plays by those same sets of rules. Yes, your market, your owner can impact some other things, but for the most part, everyone's supposed to be playing by the same sets of rules here, right? If Kawhi Leonard is making a lower dollar amount than what his market value is in the NBA on his contract, and then they're funneling him money to make up for this, that's a terrible look and compromises all of this here, right? Look, the Clippers have Steve Ballmer, the richest owner in the NBA. If he's willing to push the boundary and the league looks the other way, how can small market teams like New Orleans compete? And that's why the NBA is investigating this, right? Like the integrity of the system, I don't want to say the league, but the system is kind of at stake with something like this. You know, what also is shady about this is that $28 million to Kawhi Leonard is well above the market value of what he would command in terms of endorsements and things like that. Look, if this was in the range of like a $4 million deal, $2 million, we wouldn't be talking here. But $28 million is unusually high to then not have any of that. They call them activations. You can activate him. You could activate the stuff. None of that occurred here. For $28 million, that's a massive waste. And again, that's their right. And Kawhi Leonard's probably just like, yeah, they didn't ask me to do anything, so whatever. And I get it. Steve Ballmer has come out and really been vocally saying like, no, Aspire, has gone bankrupt. This all came out in court filings through creditors. I got kind of, like not robbed, but swindled is probably the word that I'm looking for. But at the same point, this seems like it's clear salary cap circumvention. And this is a very important thing, right? The rules do need to be fair to everybody. And so that's what's going on here. John Corrales of the Boston Sports Journal, Locked On Celtics, and with me on Fridays on Locked On NBA, uncovered that there was another $20 million in stock options for Kawhi Leonard, making this closer to a $50 million deal, $48 million. $50 million is what Steve Ballmer invested in this company, right? There's a clear conflict of interest here. Even if everyone's on the up and up, there's a conflict of interest that it's come on, what are you doing? How did you not think this would get viewed? And that's disappointing anyway. But that's why the league has to take this seriously, because they've stepped in on stuff like this in the past. I'll explain the Josh Smith Minnesota deal back from 1999. I remember that one actually very clearly because I was very fascinated by that. Let's look at why this matters for the Pelicans, and then a little bit of fallout from it a little bit later in the show. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. We've been running FanDuel ads on here for a long time. They've been a long-time partner of Locked On. This is probably the best deal that I've ever seen. And I love using FanDuel because it just fits the way that I like to bet. You've got player props. You can build same-game parlays or even jump in live as the action unfolds if you realize things are trending in a certain way. And it just makes every game a little bit more exciting, whether you're watching the Saints or your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. And it's quick, it's easy, it just adds a little bit of juice to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet, and you're going to get $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins over at FanDuel. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you're not an everydayer, it's all right. I still appreciate y'all tuning in. I love everyone who's tuning in to Locked On Pelicans. But if you listen one day a week, try listening twice. We're going to have a really interesting season here in New Orleans, and I'm really excited for it. For your second listen, it's Locked On Saints. Saints lost against the Arizona Cardinals. Is that a good loss? Like, did they look well? They had a chance to tie it up at the end. Ross Jackson's going to make sense of everything we saw in that game. Also, Chris Olave getting banged up in there. How's he going to look long term? Ross Jackson over Locked On Saints is going to be covering it all. So why does this Kawhi Leonard scandal matter for the New Orleans Pelicans, right? Let's connect the dots to the team here. The thing that jumped out at me when I was first reading this on a beach, which was at least somewhat enjoyable, was that this is terrible for small markets if this is true. Because one of the things everyone is saying is this is the tip of the iceberg. This is the tip of the iceberg here. And, no one wants to go down this rabbit hole and see what else there is. I do, because look, I guarantee you the Pelicans aren't doing this. So why I think this impacts small markets and the Pelicans in particular, right? It goes to that small market insecurity, which exists. Look, I feel like I have a good pulse of what Pelicans fans are thinking, and there is a constant worry overall, I think, of, can this team keep up? Can they retain stars? Could they potentially attract free agents or be a trade request destination? And if the league, the NBA, Adam Silver, the commissioner, is essentially letting big markets promise bonus money through shady deals, that insecurity, which maybe isn't a fact, starts to become a reality here, right? Look at the Pelicans this past season. Look at them. This is why I talk a lot about the salary cap, because it very much matters for this franchise in a way that maybe it doesn't matter as much, that the first apron, second apron luxury tax matters more for this team than some other teams here. But at least those collective bargaining agreement rules are in place to keep things as fair as possible, create as much parity as possible. And we're kind of seeing that here. But look at the Pelicans this past season. They traded Brandon Ingram instead of offering him the max contract that he wanted, partially because, not that he wasn't worthy of it, you can argue that, right? Didn't get it with the Toronto Raptors, besides the point, because of their salary cap situation and where they were and the resistance to paying the luxury tax. They're kind of just operating with a $13.4 million trade exception, 6.1 left of the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And that's kind of it, right? This team needs to maximize every dollar, every roster spot here, and they're following the rules. And if you have a team like the Los Angeles Clippers and all of these big market teams that are scared to death of the second apron and trying to avoid that, find a way to avoid the second apron while still paying the same amount of money to players, but not getting the penalties that come with the second apron. Look, New Orleans isn't going to do that. If Los Angeles, New York, Golden State, San Francisco, the Bay Area, and others could just add extra financial incentives outside of the collective bargaining agreement, why would any player commit long-term to a small market team? Maybe Oklahoma City because they're winning, but overall, if you can get the number one thing, right? I think I've talked about this before. The number one thing that players look for when they change teams is the most money. Who's going to pay me the most? It's truly that. So for the 90% of the league, maybe higher than that, it's who's going to pay the most money. It's not what's the best situation for me to try and win. It's, for the most part, who's going to pay me the most money. These careers are short. They're trying to maximize every penny, every dollar of that. That is why Cooper Flagg, had New Orleans won the draft lottery, Cooper Flagg was going to go pro and was not going to go back to Duke because the amount of money that he would have left on the table if, say, a team ended up number one in the lottery that he didn't want to go to, he was never not going to go pro because the amount of money he would be leaving off the table if he played the same amount of years is an unfathomable amount. It ended up being something like, I did the math on the show. It's a lot of money. So you can't do that, right? The money matters. So if you can get the money anywhere, then it becomes about other things. But because of those salary cap restrictions, because of the luxury tax and all that, you always can't get the same amount of money because teams just straight up don't have it or too scared to go into one of the aprons to pay it. That can help a team like New Orleans get some of those players when those teams are scared to kind of spend too much. But what if they sign him to a below market deal, a team-friendly contract, let's call it, and then we'll kick him a bunch of endorsement money that's kind of to make up for it, right? Look, Big markets are obviously going to have more endorsement money. Like, there's nothing you can do about it. But $28 million, not using Kawhi Leonard for anything, that's the type of thing that does need to concern every small market team here, right? That's where this becomes a really big thing. And New Orleans, it would have trouble competing with that sort of thing. It's just a fact of all of that, right? Like, that sucks, right? That's the type of thing that when the integrity of the system is compromised like that, why even watch, right? Like, there's already enough calm conspiracies, misguided statements about, oh, the league's, it's all rigged. They're all trying to do it for these big market teams. I don't actually believe any of that, right? But if they don't come, they'll investigate. And I don't know if this is going to be easy to prove. We'll talk about that in the next segment here. But say this is like what every team is doing. And maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Who knows? It's just alleged at this point. If that's the case, then it starts to feel like things are rigged from the jump. And then what's the point in watching when the outcome is already determined, right? One of the reasons we watch sports is like, it can even go to the gambling aspect of it, right? Like, who knows what's going to happen? You got to tune in. You've got to watch it. It's what keeps you connected to a lot of this, among other things, right? But if it's just, this is how it's going to go to start the year, every year, then no, that you lose the hope, right? And one of the things that I have learned is, fan bases need to have hope going into a season for everything, whether it's young players, whether it's championship aspirations, whatever it is, you need to have that. But if there are certain teams, I don't even want to say it's only big market teams, it could depend on the owner too, that is straight up cheating, right? And you just know you don't have a chance in the first place to be competitive, to win a title, all that. There's no point in watching, right? That's when then people tune out, ratings go down, and that becomes a massive problem for the NBA, right? That becomes a problem for the Pelicans if fans just feel like this team is never going to be able to compete due to things that are literally outside their control. The Pelicans can control what they can control. They can't control what the Clippers and Steve Ballmer do, right? So if the Pelicans can be doing everything perfect, but if the cards are stacked against you from the get-go, well, then what's the point in watching the NBA? What's the point in following the NBA? This is the type of thing that can make people very jaded. And that's why I do think the NBA needs to come in like pretty hard on this situation. This collective bargaining agreement, the apron era as it's being called right now, was meant to be really punitive and to like hurt a lot of teams and to scare off a lot of teams from to just basically not create like a monopoly at the top, to not have Boston running away with it every year, or the New York Knicks or the Golden State Warriors, and have these teams like be forced to break up some of their championship rosters. Look at like how much turnover the Boston Celtics have had recently with Jrue Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis all leaving the team. The league wants that sort of thing. One, they want player movement, right? And you don't want one team at the top to be there for too long because you want everyone to feel like they have a chance. That's the whole purpose of this new collective bargaining agreement that we're under with the apron era. And if you can somehow get around those very punitive and very tough restrictions, that's a big problem. And that's something that the NBA is really going to be looking at. They hired the same law firm that investigated the Clippers during the Donald Sterling stuff. That's going to be really interesting to kind of like see how this all plays out. Let's kind of talk about what it means for the future, how this might shake out. We're going to go back to 1999 too on something, which, by the way, would not benefit the Pelicans at all. Even if the NBA comes down hard, it might hurt New Orleans. I'll explain what that is, how that is. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget, watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Also every weekday, Monday through Friday at 10:30 a.m., 5:30 p.m. as well. For the rest of the week, or at least a couple more days, the Locked On is doing their top 10 NBA players for this coming season. The Locked On NBA top 10 is here. Voted on by the NBA hosts of the Locked On Podcast Network, our top 10 was formed by experts that cover these teams, myself included, and players every single day. You can find the full list on Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't miss my reaction for where the Pelicans players land. We're going to look at Zion Williamson. Where do you think he ranks in the top 100 players for next season with injuries factored in? It might surprise you. My ranking for him might surprise you as well. We'll then look at Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, and the rest of the team as well. Where do some of these guys fall? Is Jordan Poole on there? Is he not? Are any of the rookies on there in the top 100? We're going to be covering that all right here on Locked On because I find it pretty interesting. So let's keep talking about this Kawhi Leonard scandal and what it means for kind of the future, the big picture here, right? Because there are more impacts on New Orleans. We just kind of went over some of the stuff here. The other thing that it just kind of hit me on, which I find kind of interesting, these are a little bit more tangential to things. But if I were Gail Benson or anyone within the Pelicans, I'd be furious about this. If I were anyone that within the state of Louisiana should be furious about this. Look, Pelicans aren't a tax-paying team. The way this works is all of the luxury tax payments go into a bucket. 50% goes to the NBA. The other 50% gets split up between all the non-tax-paying teams. So if you don't go into the luxury tax, you get a big check at the end of the season from, some of the money of that pool of things. If $28 million or whatever the amount per year is kept out of that luxury tax payment, that's less money for each individual team. Right? That might mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the amount is, $1 million to the Pelicans that they don't get because the Clippers circumvented the salary cap. If you're going to try and get owners to turn on one another, which is what it's going to kind of take maybe for this to really come down hard, well then, their pocketbooks is the way to do it. This would make me furious if I was a non-tax-paying team or an owner and was like, why in the world is this going to be okay? That money should be going to my franchise for them to hopefully reinvest into all of that. The other thing is, right, pro sports players pay taxes in each city they, play in. If Kawhi Leonard plays 2 games in New Orleans, he's got to pay 2 games, his per game salary. He's got to pay taxes on that to the state of Louisiana. If he should be making more per year, that per game number goes up. That's more tax revenue for each literal individual state that isn't getting that, right? In this case, it might have been, $10,000, $20,000, let's say, but, look at the state. We could probably use that money right now, right? That stuff does kind of have this weird other impact on things, I think, here. And so that stuff matters. So if the league comes in hard, what might they do, right? Steve Ballmer, what's Steve Ballmer's net worth? Let's see. Steve Ballmer is... That's a number. 153.4 billion US. That's what he's worth. If you find him $5 million, does that even matter? Doesn't matter, right? The Clippers don't have draft picks that you can really take away from them right now because they have traded them all. They've almost kind of insulated themselves in a way against punishment here. The money doesn't matter, right? Remember the league find Anthony Davis for his trade request? And I was still hosting I was hosting Locked On Pelicans at the time as well. It ended up being to someone making $70,000 a year, $100 fine. To keep my $100, is that going to do anything to you? Probably not. Hopefully not. $5 million, $10 million, $15, $20 million to Steve Ballmer. That's not going to do anything. That's not going to do a thing. That's a problem here. How do you punish this team? Should they be found kind of guilty of circumventing the salary cap, right? What you would hope they could do is maybe void Kawhi Leonard's contract. This actually happened with Joe Smith in Minnesota back in 1999. There was a scandal there where he was basically signing below market deals for multiple years, knowing that when they gained his bird rights, he would get a much bigger payout, but only if he did it this way. And eventually the league considered this bad enough that they voided his contract, docked the Wolves 5 draft picks because they operated outside of the rules of the salary cap. Now, they were foolish and literally wrote this down in a contract outside of all of this. That's dumb. That's salary cap circumvention. But let's say you get to this and you void Kawhi Leonard's deal. Then what? You know what he's going to end up doing? He's just going to go and sign with a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder or one of them. all of a sudden, Kawhi Leonard's a free agent. No teams have salary cap space to offer him massive amounts of money. Maybe the Nets could, but is he going to go there? Maybe, maybe not. But does he then just sign for someone's mid-level exception that they have remaining? Is that how a team like OKC or someone else gets a really good player for very cheap that they have no business getting? That's a thing, right? Like, that's concerning. That's a big problem here. So this stuff really matters, right? It matters for the Pelicans because, look, they've done things right. They've been trying to kind of build organically. There's, young players, Jeremiah Fears, Trey Murphy. They're preserving flexibility to kind of wait for the right moment. And that doesn't even matter because other teams are playing by different rules. So the NBA needs to enforce the rules. And if they do, this might impact other teams, and maybe New Orleans, playing by the rules, comes out looking like in a better position than some of these other franchises here, right? And this matters for Zion, who we're going to talk about in tomorrow's show. His future with the team. I'd be here if he can kind of get it all elsewhere when, like, that's not fair, that's not correct. And that's why this stuff very much matters. This investigation is about more than just Kawhi Leonard, than Steve Ballmer, than the Los Angeles Clippers, than big markets. It's truly, in my opinion, about a lot of the credibility of the league and whether small market teams like the Pelicans have a fair chance or fair enough chance to try and win an NBA title. What do you think about the scandal? How do you view all of this? Let me know in the comments down below, because I do think this is a really big story, and hopefully the league can get this kind of resolved sooner rather than later, because the season is coming soon, real soon, and you don't want to see this kind of going on and so forth. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with you all tomorrow. We're going to talk about Zion Williamson in the Locked On Top 100 and where he ranks. Might surprise you. See you tomorrow.